The lights of the studio glowed like fire against the dark skyline of New York. The audience murmured with excitement, unaware that what they were about to witness would soon explode across the internet. The booming voice of the announcer echoed through the air. "Please welcome Prince Harry." Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really caused Prince Harry to completely lose it on live television. Harry stepped onto the stage, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. The confidence was almost too polished, like a man walking into battle disguised as royalty. He wore a sharp, fitted navy suit, no tie, no smile, just control. The crowd clapped, but there was hesitation in the applause. They could feel it. Something was off. Across from him sat Greg Gutfeld, America's provocateur of late-night television, known for his razor-edged wit and refusal to back down. He rose to greet the prince, offering a handshake that Harry accepted, with a firm grip. Their eyes met briefly, a spark of tension in the air. Greg smiled, the kind of smile that knew more than it said. "Harry," he began warmly, "good to have you here. You've had quite the year. California, media deals, new projects. Welcome to the show." Harry returned a polite nod. "Of course. I suppose it's only fair your viewers hear the truth from me for once, rather than the usual nonsense." The audience chuckled nervously. The tone was already shifting. Greg's smirk faded slightly. He wasn't used to being brushed off this early. Still, he pressed on. "Let's start simple. How's married life treating you? Plenty of people have been curious about how things are going in California." Harry's lips curved, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Married life is wonderful, Greg, but I find it fascinating that so many people think they're entitled to an opinion about it. My personal life isn't a public project." The air thickened. Greg raised an eyebrow. "Fair point," he replied evenly. "But you've lived your whole life in the public eye. That curiosity comes with the territory, doesn't it?" Harry leaned forward slightly, his voice tightening. "A territory I never asked for, Greg. People like you have turned curiosity into a career. You profit from the pain of others and call it journalism." A ripple moved through the crowd. The tension was now unmistakable. Greg let out a light chuckle, masking the sting. "Well then, let's move on. You've said moving to America gave you freedom. Do you think the British public ever really understood you?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "Understood me? They were spoon-fed lies. Decades of headlines written to sell papers, not tell truths. I wasn't misunderstood, Greg. I was targeted." The audience gasped softly, some whispering to each other. "Strong words," Greg said calmly. "But some would argue you turned your back on your country, that you walked away from duty. How do you respond to that?" Harry let out a low, humorless laugh. "Criticism from people who bow to an institution that traps them in gold cages? I left because I saw through the illusion. They idolize William and Kate as if they're saviors. But I've seen behind the curtain, Greg. It's not devotion. It's delusion." Gasps filled the room. The audience was no longer sure if they were watching an interview or a confrontation. Greg tapped his pen slowly, eyes locked on the prince. "Interesting take," he said. "But since you brought up William and Kate, a lot of people admire them for embracing the responsibilities you rejected. Do you admire them?" Harry's tone sharpened like a blade. "Admire them? They perfected the art of performance. Smiles for the camera, silence behind closed doors. You Americans adore them because you only see the polished surface. You don't see the truth." The silence that followed was heavy. Even Greg's smirk disappeared. He cleared his throat, steadying his voice. "All right then. Let's talk about your new life. You've signed deals with Netflix, written books, done interviews. Some say you've simply traded one kind of fame for another. What would you say to that?" Harry leaned back, crossing his arms. His expression hardened. "I didn't trade anything. I survived. After years of being hunted by tabloids and betrayed by those closest to me, I've finally taken control of my own story. If people don't like it, they can look away. A few awkward laughs flickered through the audience. Greg nodded slightly. His voice was calm, but the spark in his eyes was back. Fair enough. But I hope you're ready for tough questions tonight. America doesn't want rehearsed answers. They want the truth. Harry's gaze was sharp, unflinching. Then you'd better be ready for real truth, Greg. Not the kind your network edits into sound bites. The tension was electric now. The polite smiles were gone. What had started as a routine interview was turning into something raw and unpredictable. The audience could feel it. They were witnessing something that couldn't be scripted. The applause light blinked, but only a few clapped. Others just watched, frozen. Greg leaned forward again, elbows resting on the desk. His voice softened, but the edge remained. You say you're left for freedom. Yet here you are again, sitting under studio lights, cameras rolling. Tell me, did you really leave the spotlight or just rebrand it? Harry smirked. You don't understand freedom, Greg. Freedom isn't about hiding. It's about choosing when to speak and when to stop letting people like you define me. Greg's brow lifted slightly. That's one way to look at it, but you've spoken quite a lot. Oprah, Netflix, book tours, interviews. Some would say your voice isn't exactly silenced. Harry's smile vanished. His jaw clenched. Critics love to talk about my voice because they've never had theirs taken away. My wife and I, we're not victims, Greg. We're survivors. And we're done being silenced. The room shifted again, the energy heavy and uneasy. Greg chuckled softly, but there was steel behind it. Let's talk about Meghan, then. People are fascinated by your marriage. There are rumors, tension, speculation. What do you say to that? Harry straightened in his chair, his tone cold. I say it's none of your business. None of anyone's business. My marriage is strong, my family is happy, and I find it insulting that gossip is treated like truth. The audience exchanged glances. The temperature on stage was rising fast. Greg stayed calm. I only ask, he said carefully, because you've made your marriage part of your story. You've spoken publicly about your struggles, about private moments. Doesn't that open the door to public curiosity? Harry's smirk returned, sharper this time. You call it curiosity. I call it obsession. You thrive on my name, Greg. Admit it. Without me, half your show would vanish. The crowd gasped. Greg blinked, the smirk fading for just a moment. But then it returned, slow, deliberate. You give yourself too much credit, Harry. I promise this show does just fine without you. Harry scoffed. Does it? Or are you finally relevant because I'm sitting here? The audience murmured. The air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Greg inhaled slowly, his pen tapping against the desk like a metronome of rising pressure. All right, he said with quiet composure. You've spoken about your freedom, your truth, and your survival. But let's not forget, you walked away from an entire family, a legacy. Do you regret the way you left? Harry's eyes darkened. Regret? He repeated. The only regret I have is not leaving sooner. I loved my grandmother, but even she was bound by the system. My father and brother chose to stay prisoners of the crown. That's their choice. I chose freedom. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Some gasped. Others leaned forward, captivated. Greg straightened in his chair, his trademark humor gone. You call it freedom, but many would call it betrayal. You didn't just leave an institution. You left your family, Harry. Harry's tone turned sharp, almost biting. Family. You call that a family? It's an image machine built to protect the heir and sacrifice the spare. I stopped playing the role they wrote for me. Greg's gaze was steady, his voice level. And yet, since leaving, you've done interviews, documentaries, books, all about that same family. It almost seems like you never left it behind. Harry's smile was thin. Because truth doesn't end when you walk away from the palace, Greg. The damage doesn't vanish overnight. Greg leaned forward, lowering his voice. Or maybe, Harry, you didn't walk away from it. You just found a new way to cash in on it. A collective gasp filled the room. Even the cameraman flinched. Harry's head snapped toward Greg. You think this is about money? He said sharply. You think after everything I went through I'd sell my story for a paycheck? You have no idea what I've endured. Greg didn't blink. I think you've made a fortune off your grievances. The royal name built your platform. Without it, would anyone listen? Harry's voice rose, cutting through the silence. That's absurd. I built something real, something meaningful. My wife and I have worked tirelessly. To do what? Greg interrupted smoothly. To produce shows no one watches. To give interviews about how unfair life is while living in a mansion most people can't imagine affording. The audience reacted audibly now, whispers, laughter, shock. Harry leaned forward, fury flashing in his eyes. You don't know me. You don't know the pain, the loss, the betrayal. Greg cut him off again. You're right. I don't. But I do know this. Everyone suffers, Harry. The difference is, not everyone makes a career out of it. Harry's face tightened, his composure cracking for the first time. Greg tilted his head slightly. Let's talk about Meghan. Harry froze. She was an actress, Greg continued evenly. She knew what fame meant. She knew the spotlight. And together you turned your marriage into a production. Do you really think people don't see that? Harry's nostrils flared. Leave my wife out of this, he said, his voice dropping low, cold. Greg didn't move. Why? She's half the story. You talk about protecting your family, but every time you sit down for another exclusive, you're exposing them again. You talk about oppression while living in luxury. You talk about honesty, yet every story you tell seems designed to keep you in the headlines. The room went dead silent. Even the audience held their breath. Harry's voice trembled, not with fear, but fury. You have no right to judge me. You don't understand the constant attacks, the lies, the threats. Greg leaned back, his expression calm, but his words cutting deep. You're right again, I don't. But I also don't see William or Kate out there complaining about it. They face the same press, the same cameras, the same pressure. The difference is, they handled it with grace. Harry's eyes widened, his jaw tightening. Grace? You call that grace? They're puppets. Polished, smiling, controlled by the palace. I escaped that prison. Greg's tone hardened. Escaped? You didn't escape, Harry. You abandoned. You left the only life you had, then blamed everyone else for it. And now you're sitting here pretending you're a victim when, in truth, you've never been freer or richer. Harry's voice cracked, louder now. You're twisting everything I've said. You're mocking what you don't understand. Greg smirked. I understand perfectly. You didn't want duty. You wanted attention. On your terms. The audience gasped again. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Harry's composure shattered completely. His tone turned sharp, emotional, raw. You think this is about attention? You sit there in your cheap suit, smirking, pretending you know what it's like to live under global scrutiny. You have no idea, Greg. None. Greg's expression didn't change. Cheap suit? At least I paid for it myself. Can you say the same about the life you've lived? The room erupted. Some gasped. Others clapped. Harry's face flushed. That's beneath you, he said through clenched teeth. Greg leaned forward. No, Harry. That's the truth. Everything you've ever had, the fame, the fortune, the platform, came from the Windsor name. Without it, you'd just be another man in California with too much time and too many cameras. Harry's voice rose. That's a lie. I've built my own life. Greg didn't flinch. You've built your brand on your family's name. Every headline, every deal, every quote. It's all tied to the crown you claim to despise. Strip that away, and what's left? Harry froze. His face hardened. But his silence said more than words ever could. Greg's tone softened slightly. but the edge remained. You talk about freedom, but you're still trapped, Harry. Not by the palace, but by your own need to prove something. The audience murmured again, caught between sympathy and shock. Harry clenched his fists, his breathing quickening. You don't know what I've sacrificed. Greg met his glare calmly. Maybe not, but I know you turned your pain into profit. That's not sacrifice. That's show business. The crowd erupted again, gasps, whispers, a few scattered laughs. Harry's voice broke through, trembling with anger. You think you can sit there and humiliate me? You're a clown hiding behind a desk, throwing stones at people you'll never understand. Greg stood slowly, his expression unreadable. Maybe. But at least I'm honest about who I am. Can you say the same? The tension in the room was suffocating now. Harry glared at him, face red, jaw tight. You don't get to question who I am. Greg's tone turned cold as steel. Then tell me, Harry, who are you without them? Without the crown, the drama, the chaos? Who are you when the cameras stop rolling? The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the lights above. Harry didn't answer. The audience was frozen. Greg stared at him, unmoving, waiting for a response that never came. The silence stretched long, heavy enough to make every second feel eternal. Harry sat motionless, his jaw locked, his eyes flicking between Greg and the floor. The prince who once commanded rooms with charm now looked cornered, stripped of his composure. Greg didn't move. He waited. The stillness itself had become the weapon. Finally, Harry broke the silence. You think you can humiliate me on live television? His voice trembled slightly. You sit there mocking, sneering, pretending to understand a life you've never lived. Greg's expression remained calm, but his tone carried the edge of a blade. I don't pretend, Harry. I ask questions. You call it mockery because you can't stand being challenged. Harry's voice rose. You think this is challenging? You think shouting accusations from behind a desk is bravery? You're nothing but a performer playing to a crowd that thrives on hate. The audience gasped. Greg leaned back slightly, his smile faint and unreadable. Maybe I'm a performer, Harry, but at least I know what I am. The question is, do you? Harry's eyes flared with fury. I know exactly who I am, he shouted. I'm someone who escaped a toxic system. Someone who refused to be silenced. Someone who... Greg interrupted, his tone sharp now. Someone who abandoned everything that gave him purpose. The room fell dead quiet again. Harry's lips parted, but no words came out. Greg pressed forward, his words cold and deliberate. You talk about oppression and freedom, but all I see is a man running from responsibility. You left your country, your duty, your family, and now you want applause for it. Harry's breathing quickened. You have no idea what I've sacrificed. Greg's tone hardened further. No, Harry. What you did wasn't sacrifice. It was convenience. You walked away when things got uncomfortable, and now you spend your days telling the world how noble that was. But deep down, you know the truth. You didn't want freedom. You wanted sympathy. The audience murmured, the tension nearly unbearable. Harry leaned forward, his voice cracking. You think I wanted any of this? The pain, the headlines, the betrayal? Greg shot back instantly. Then stop living in it. Stop selling it. You claim to hate the spotlight, yet you chase it at every opportunity. You claim to crave peace, but you bring chaos wherever you go. Harry's face turned crimson. His hand slammed against the armrest of his chair. You're twisting everything I've said. Greg's smirk returned, faint but sharp. No, Harry, I'm just saying what millions are thinking. The crowd murmured again. The moment felt electric, like the air before a storm. Harry's patience shattered. You think you can sit there and judge me? You, a late-night host who profits off insult and controversy? Greg's voice stayed calm, almost too calm. I might profit from controversy, Harry, but I don't pretend to be a victim while doing it. Harry's chest heaved. You're pathetic. Greg tilted his head slightly. And yet, here you are on my show. Harry's eyes widened, fury blazing. You think you can define me? You think you can humiliate me? Greg leaned forward slowly, his voice lowering to a quiet, dangerous tone. No, Harry. You're doing that all by yourself. The audience gasped again. The silence afterward was deafening. Harry stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is over, he snapped. You're not worth my time. Greg remained seated, his gaze calm and unwavering. You're walking away again, Harry. Seems to be a pattern. The line hit like lightning. Harry froze for a second, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. You think you're clever, don't you? He spat. You think this makes you brave? Greg finally stood, facing him eye to eye. No, it makes me honest. Something you might try sometime. Harry's voice trembled with rage. You don't know what honesty is. You don't know what it's like to be hunted, lied about, betrayed by your own family. Greg's tone sharpened. And yet somehow William and Kate managed to survive the same family without burning the world down. Maybe the problem isn't them, Harry. Maybe it's you. The words hit like a punch. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Harry's face turned scarlet. You're a disgrace, he hissed. This whole thing is a disgrace. Greg's smirk returned, quiet and deliberate. Then why are you here? Harry yanked off his microphone, his hand shaking. Because I thought you'd treat this seriously. But you're just another vulture, feeding off drama. Greg's voice turned cold as steel. Maybe. But I didn't come here begging for sympathy. You did. That was the breaking point. Harry slammed the mic onto the chair. You're beneath me. All of this is beneath me, he shouted before storming off stage. The audience sat in stunned silence, eyes following the prince as he disappeared behind the curtain. For a long moment, no one moved. The cameras lingered on the empty chair where he'd been sitting. Then, slowly, Greg sat back down. He straightened his jacket, exhaled, and looked straight into the camera.